What if your happiness wasn't just a fleeting emotion, but a lasting legacy you could create every day? In this audiobook, we'll uncover the secrets to finding joy, even in life's most challenging moments. Welcome to the Secret Library. Before starting, comment below where you're currently listening from in the world. Also, please hit the like button and subscribe so we can continue making stories like this. Chapter 1. Embracing the Foundations of Happiness. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting the walls with a warm, golden hue. Clara sat by the window, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Life had not been particularly kind lately. The pressures of work, fractured relationships, and an overwhelming sense of aimlessness had left her feeling untethered. She had always thought happiness was something to be earned, a reward for achieving the milestones society deemed important. Yet, as the world around her seemed to blur into a monotonous grind, Clara began to wonder if she'd misunderstood happiness altogether. The thought lingered as she opened her journal, a habit she'd clung to in her quest for clarity. As the pen touched the paper, words spilled out. What if happiness isn't something you chase? What if it's something you create? The idea felt foreign, yet oddly comforting. Clara decided, then and there, to explore what it truly meant to cultivate joy, starting not with grand gestures, but with small, intentional steps. Her first step was to reflect on what happiness had meant to her so far. She thought of fleeting moments, the laughter of friends over a shared meal, the serenity of a quiet walk in the woods, the satisfaction of completing a creative project. None of these moments had been tied to major achievements or external validation. They had been simple, grounded in presence and connection. Perhaps, Clara mused, happiness wasn't a destination, but a series of choices, each one bringing her closer to a life of meaning and fulfillment. That day, Clara decided to focus on the little things. She began her mornings with a few minutes of deep breathing, savoring the quiet before the day's demands took over. She made a point to notice the vibrant colors of the flowers in her garden, their petals glistening with dew. In the evenings, she listed 3 things she was grateful for, no matter how small. Slowly, these practices began to shift her perspective, grounding her in the present and opening her eyes to the beauty around her. One evening, as the stars twinkled in the night sky, Clara remembered a story her grandmother used to tell about a farmer who found joy in the rhythm of his days. He worked hard, but he never rushed. He celebrated each harvest, not for its size, but for the effort it represented. Clara realized that the farmer's joy came not from external rewards, but from the meaning he found in his work and his connection to the land. She resolved to approach her own life with the same mindset, finding purpose in each task and appreciating the journey rather than fixating on the outcome. Over time, Clara's days began to feel lighter, her heart less burdened. She noticed how her energy shifted when she chose to focus on what she could control rather than dwelling on what she couldn't. She started reaching out to old friends, rekindling connections that had faded over the years. These moments of shared laughter and vulnerability reminded her that happiness often grows in the fertile soil of relationships. Yet, the path wasn't always smooth. There were days when Clara felt the weight of her worries pressing down, moments when doubt crept in, whispering that her efforts were futile. On those days, she turned to self-compassion. She spoke to herself with kindness, reminding herself that growth takes time and that setbacks were a natural part of the journey. She found solace in the words she'd written in her journal. Happiness is not about perfection. It's about embracing imperfection with grace. One crisp autumn morning, as Clara strolled through the park, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The golden leaves crunched under her feet, and the cool breeze carried the scent of earth and possibility. For the first time, she truly believed that happiness wasn't something she had to wait for or earn. It was something she could cultivate moment by moment with intention and care. That night, as she sat by the window and gazed at the moonlit sky, Clara wrote a simple affirmation in her journal. I have the power to create joy, one small step at a time. The act of writing, it felt like planting a seed, one she knew would grow as she continued to nurture it. And as she drifted to sleep, her dreams were filled with vibrant gardens, each bloom a testament to the happiness she was learning to cultivate. Chapter 2. The Power of Small Moments. The morning sun painted the city streets in hues of gold, illuminating the bustle of daily life. Among the crowd, Clara walked with purpose, her steps deliberate yet unhurried. She had begun to notice the details she once overlooked. The laughter of children playing on the sidewalk, the comforting aroma wafting from a nearby bakery, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, casting intricate patterns on the pavement. These small moments, insignificant on their own, were becoming the threads that wove a richer, more vibrant tapestry of her days. Clara's shift in perspective had been gradual, born from her decision to embrace the present. She had spent years chasing milestones, believing happiness lay just beyond the next promotion, the next accomplishment, the next big thing. Yet, each achievement brought only fleeting satisfaction, leaving her yearning for something more. Now, she was learning to find joy in the quiet, ordinary moments that filled her days. Her first lesson came unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, Clara found herself in a coffee shop, seeking refuge from the storm. As she waited for her order, she struck up a conversation with an elderly man sitting by the window. He spoke of his late wife with a fondness that lit up his face, recounting stories of their shared mornings sipping coffee and watching the world wake up. "It wasn't the grand vacations or big celebrations that I treasure most," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "It was the small, simple moments, her smile over the rim of her cup, the warmth of her hand in mine." His words lingered with Clara long after the rain had stopped. Inspired by that encounter, Clara began to slow down and savor the small pleasures of life. She noticed how her morning tea tasted richer when she paused to enjoy it, how her favorite songs felt more alive when she truly listened, and how her walks became meditative when she paid attention to the rhythm of her steps. These moments, though fleeting, grounded her in the present and brought a quiet sense of contentment. As days turned into weeks, Clara's newfound appreciation extended to her relationships. She made a point to be fully present during conversations, listening not just to words but to the emotions behind them. Her best friend, Elise, remarked on how much more connected she felt during their talks. "It's like you're really here," Elise said one evening over dinner. Clara realized how often she had been physically present but mentally elsewhere, her thoughts consumed by worries or to-do lists. Now, she was discovering the depth and richness of truly showing up. One evening, Clara decided to host a small gathering at her apartment, inviting a few close friends. As they sat around the table, sharing stories and laughter, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the candles flickering nearby. It was a warmth born of connection, of being surrounded by people who cared for her and whom she cared for in return. In that moment, she understood that happiness wasn't a solitary pursuit. It was something that grew when shared. Not every day was filled with sunshine and laughter. There were still moments of doubt and difficulty, days when the weight of life felt heavy. But even on those days, Clara found solace in the small joys that remained constant. The comfort of her favorite book, the beauty of a sunset, the steady rhythm of her breath. These anchors reminded her that happiness wasn't about erasing hardship, but about finding light in the midst of it. One of the most profound lessons Clara learned during this time was the power of gratitude. Each night before bed, she wrote down 3 things she was thankful for, no matter how small. At first, the practice felt forced, but over time, it became a ritual she looked forward to. The gratitude journal helped her reframe her day, shifting her focus from what was lacking to what was abundant. Even on challenging days, there was always something to appreciate. A kind word from a colleague, the vibrant colors of autumn leaves, the simple fact of having made it through. The impact of these small moments rippled outward, influencing other aspects of Clara's life. She found herself more patient, more resilient, and more open to new experiences. When faced with a setback at work, she chose to see it as an opportunity to learn rather than a failure. When a friendship faced strain, she approached the situation with empathy and a willingness to listen. These choices, small as they seemed, created a sense of agency and empowerment that bolstered her happiness. One crisp morning, as Clara walked through the park, she came across a group of children flying kites. Their laughter filled the air as colorful shapes danced against the sky. She stopped to watch, a smile spreading across her face. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace, a reminder that happiness was not something distant or elusive. It was here, in the present, waiting to be noticed and embraced. Chapter 3. Finding Strength in Vulnerability. The late afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet park. Clara sat on a wooden bench, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the edge of her notebook. Vulnerability was a word she had avoided for most of her life. To her, it had always seemed synonymous with weakness, with opening herself to pain and disappointment. Yet, as she reflected on the moments that had brought her the deepest connections and the most profound growth, she realized that vulnerability had been the silent thread woven through them all. Clara thought back to a conversation she had with her mother months earlier. It had been a heated discussion about family expectations, one that had left both of them frustrated and distant. For weeks, they avoided addressing the tension, each too proud or too afraid to bridge the gap. But one evening, Clara's mother called, her voice hesitant yet sincere. "I miss you," she said simply. In that moment, the walls they had both built crumbled. Clara responded with equal honesty, admitting her own hurt and longing. That phone call didn't solve all their issues, but it reopened a channel of communication and trust. It was a reminder that vulnerability wasn't about being unguarded all the time. It was about choosing to be open when it mattered most. As she sat in the park, Clara thought of how often she had avoided being vulnerable with others. There were friendships she had let slip away because she feared rejection, opportunities she had declined because she didn't want to risk failure. Yet, the moments when she had dared to be vulnerable stood out like bright beacons in her memory. They were the moments when she had felt most alive, most connected to herself and to others. The realization stirred something within her. Vulnerability, she decided, wasn't weakness. It was courage. It was the willingness to be seen and to take risks, even when the outcome was uncertain. It was the bridge that turned acquaintances into friends, that transformed hardships into growth. Clara resolved to embrace this new perspective, to lean into vulnerability rather than shying away from it. The first step was small but significant. A few days later, she met with Elise for their weekly coffee date. Instead of brushing off the question, "How have you been?" with a polite, "Good," Clara hesitated. "Honestly," she said, "it's been a tough week. I've been feeling overwhelmed at work and a bit lost about what I'm doing." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Clara worried she had said too much. But Elise's response was immediate and heartfelt. "I've been feeling the same way," she admitted. Their conversation deepened, moving from surface pleasantries to shared struggles and mutual support. Clara left the coffee shop feeling lighter, reminded that vulnerability often invites connection. Encouraged by that experience, Clara began to take more risks in opening up. At work, she spoke honestly with her manager about the challenges she faced balancing her projects. To her surprise, her manager didn't see her admission as a weakness, but as an opportunity to provide support and resources. With friends, she shared her dreams and fears more openly, finding that her authenticity inspired them to do the same. Each act of vulnerability felt like stepping into the unknown, but it also felt like coming home to herself. One evening, Clara attended a storytelling event at a local community center. The theme was resilience, and participants were invited to share personal stories of overcoming adversity. Clara had no intention of speaking. She had come as a spectator, drawn by her curiosity and love for storytelling. But as she listened to others share their experiences, their voices trembling with emotion yet steady with resolve, she felt a pull. Her own story, one of navigating grief and rediscovering joy, bubbled to the surface. When the host asked if anyone else wanted to share, Clara surprised herself by raising her hand. As she stood at the microphone, her heart pounded and her hands shook. But as she began to speak, the fear melted away. She told the audience about the loss of her father, the weight of unspoken words and unresolved regrets, and the journey of healing that followed. She spoke of the small moments of grace that had carried her through, a kind stranger's smile, a letter she had written to her father but never sent, the way the sunlight danced on the water during her morning walks. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat before it erupted into applause. Several people approached her afterward to thank her for her courage and to share how her story had resonated with them. Clara left the event feeling both exhilarated and humbled. It was a turning point, a reminder that vulnerability wasn't just about opening up to others. It was about owning her truth and finding strength in it. As the weeks passed, Clara continued to practice vulnerability in small and meaningful ways. She reached out to a friend she hadn't spoken to in years, apologizing for the distance and expressing her desire to reconnect. She signed up for a pottery class, knowing she would be a beginner surrounded by more experienced students. She even started journaling her fears and doubts, giving herself permission to confront them without judgment. Chapter 4. The Balance Between Effort and Ease. Clara stretched out on the sunlit grass, the warmth of the day soaking into her skin. She had taken the afternoon off from her usual flurry of responsibilities, carving out time to simply be. The world around her hummed with quiet life. The rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional chirp of a bird perched high above. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of constant striving begin to lift. In that moment, she realized how often her days had been consumed by effort, a relentless push to achieve, improve, and prove herself. She had been running on a treadmill of her own making, forgetting the value of ease and stillness. Her mind wandered back to a conversation she had with an old mentor, a wise and gentle woman named Rose. "Life is like a dance," Rose had said, her voice carrying the cadence of someone who'd lived through many seasons. "You need both effort and ease. Lean too far into either, and you'll lose your rhythm." At the time, Clara hadn't fully grasped the wisdom of those words. But now, lying beneath the expansive sky, they began to make sense. Clara's days had long been defined by effort. She prided herself on her work ethic, on her ability to push through challenges and accomplish her goals. Yet, the harder she worked, the more elusive happiness seemed. She had bought into the idea that success and happiness were one and the same, only to find herself burned out and disconnected. It was as though she had been climbing a mountain, only to reach the top and realize the view wasn't what she'd hoped for. The turning point came when Clara decided to experiment with balance. She began by intentionally carving out moments of ease, setting aside time to rest and recharge without guilt. It wasn't easy at first. She felt a constant pull to fill the silence, to tick another item off her to-do list. But gradually, she learned to sit with the stillness, to savor the luxury of doing nothing. She discovered that in those moments of ease, her mind became clearer, her creativity flowed more freely, and her sense of joy deepened. One evening, Clara attended a yoga class that emphasized the balance between effort and relaxation. The instructor's voice was calm and steady as she guided the class through a series of poses, encouraging them to find their edge without pushing beyond it. "Listen to your body," the instructor said. "Find the space where effort meets ease." Clara felt a flicker of recognition. This was the balance Rose had spoken of, the dance between striving and surrender. The class ended with a long savasana, a pose of total rest. As Clara lay on the mat, her body heavy and her breath steady, she felt an unfamiliar sense of contentment. It wasn't the fleeting high of achievement or the shallow relief of distraction. It was a deep, quiet peace that came from simply being. She carried that feeling with her as she left the studio, resolving to integrate it into her daily life. Over the weeks that followed, Clara began to approach her work with a newfound sense of balance. She set boundaries around her time, prioritizing tasks that aligned with her values and letting go of those that didn't. She learned to say no to commitments that drained her energy, recognizing that her worth wasn't tied to how much she could do. In moments of stress, she paused to breathe, grounding herself in the present before moving forward. These small shifts created a ripple effect, transforming her days from a race to a rhythm. Clara also began to notice the balance between effort and ease in her relationships. She had always been the one to initiate plans, to reach out and maintain connections. While she valued her role as a nurturer, she realized it was okay to step back and let others take the lead. To her surprise, her friendships didn't falter. If anything, they grew stronger as her loved ones reciprocated her care. It was a lesson in trust, in allowing relationships to flow naturally rather than forcing them. One weekend, Clara decided to tackle a long-overdue home project, reorganizing her cluttered living room. In the past, she would have approached it with relentless determination, pushing through exhaustion to get it done in one go. But this time, she chose a different approach. She worked in bursts, taking breaks to rest and enjoy a cup of tea. She played music that made her smile and allowed herself to savor the process rather than rushing to the finish line. By the end of the day, the room was transformed, not just in appearance, but in energy. It felt lighter, more inviting, a reflection of the balance she was cultivating within herself. As Clara embraced this balance, she began to notice its impact on her overall well-being. She felt more energized, more present, and more attuned to the moments that brought her joy. The constant pressure to perform gave way to a gentler, more sustainable rhythm. She still worked hard and pursued her goals, but she did so from a place of alignment rather than urgency. She found that by balancing effort with ease, she was not only more productive, but also more fulfilled. Chapter 5: The Quiet Power of Gratitude. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Clara sat on the edge of her small balcony, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. The world below moved in its usual rhythm. Commuters hurried to work, children laughed on their way to school, and the occasional jogger passed by, their breaths visible in the cool air. Clara had always considered herself observant, but lately, she had begun to notice more: the kindness in a stranger's smile, the vibrant colors of the trees, the way the early sunlight danced on dewy grass. These moments, once overlooked, now felt like tiny treasures. She had started a new habit a few weeks earlier, inspired by an article about the benefits of gratitude. Each night before bed, Clara opened her journal and wrote down 3 things she was grateful for that day. At first, the practice felt awkward and repetitive, as if she were forcing herself to find gratitude where none existed. But over time, it became easier, more natural. Her lists began to expand beyond the obvious: a good meal, a productive day, to include subtler joys: the sound of rain tapping against her window, the warmth of her cat curled up at her feet, the feeling of genuine connection in a conversation. The chapter of her life that unfolded next was one of transformation. Clara discovered that gratitude wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was a way of seeing the world. It shifted her focus from what was lacking to what was abundant, from frustration to appreciation. She began to notice how gratitude softened the edges of her stress, how it created space for joy even in difficult moments. One evening, Clara attended a lecture at the community center about the science of gratitude. The speaker, a psychologist named Dr. Lillian Harris, explained how gratitude rewires the brain. When we practice gratitude, Dr. Harris said, we activate neural pathways associated with positivity and well-being. It's like exercising a muscle. The more we do it, the stronger it becomes. Clara found herself captivated, her notebook filling with scribbled notes about dopamine, neuroplasticity, and the transformative power of perspective. Dr. Harris shared a story about a patient who had overcome a deep depression through gratitude. The patient, a man named Victor, had been encouraged to keep a gratitude journal as part of his therapy. At first, he struggled to find anything to be thankful for, his life overshadowed by loss and disappointment. But as the weeks went on, his lists grew longer and more heartfelt. Victor began to reconnect with the world around him, finding beauty in the small, everyday moments he had once taken for granted. His story resonated deeply with Clara, affirming her belief in the quiet power of gratitude. Encouraged by what she had learned, Clara decided to take her practice a step further. She began incorporating gratitude into her daily interactions, expressing her appreciation openly to the people around her. She thanked the barista who remembered her usual order, the neighbor who held the elevator door, the colleague who lent a listening ear. At first, she worried her words might come across as insincere or awkward, but she quickly discovered the opposite. Her expressions of gratitude often sparked genuine smiles and heartfelt exchanges, creating a ripple effect of kindness. One day, Clara received a handwritten note from her friend Elise. The note thanked Clara for her support during a difficult time and described how much their friendship meant. Clara was deeply moved, realizing how rarely people put their appreciation into words. Inspired, she decided to write her own gratitude letters to the important people in her life. Over the course of a week, she penned heartfelt notes to her parents, her closest friends, and even an old teacher who had shaped her love of writing. The act of writing these letters brought Clara an unexpected sense of peace and fulfillment, as if she were giving back to the people who had shaped her journey. As Clara continued her gratitude practice, she noticed subtle but profound changes in her perspective. Challenges that once felt overwhelming now seemed more manageable. When her car broke down on a rainy morning, she found herself focusing on the helpful mechanic who went out of his way to fix it quickly. When a project at work didn't go as planned, she took solace in the lessons learned and the support of her team. Gratitude didn't erase the difficulties, but it reframed them, reminding her of the resilience and resources she carried within her. The practice of gratitude also deepened Clara's connections with others. She became more attuned to the people in her life, noticing their kindnesses and acknowledging them in ways that strengthened their bonds. Her relationships, once marked by polite exchanges, grew richer and more meaningful. Clara realized that gratitude wasn't just about what she received, it was about what she gave. It was an act of generosity, a way of saying, "I see you, and I value you." One quiet evening, as Clara wrote in her journal, she reflected on how far she had come. Her entries no longer felt like a chore, but like a sacred ritual, a moment of connection with herself and the world around her. She found herself writing not just about the good things, but about the hard ones too. The challenges that had taught her resilience, the losses that had deepened her empathy, the setbacks that had shaped her growth. Gratitude, she realized, was not about ignoring the shadows, but about finding the light within them. Chapter 6. The Art of Letting Go. The afternoon sun filtered through the sheer curtains in Clara's living room, casting gentle patterns of light and shadow on the walls. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a cardboard box open before her. Its contents were a collection of trinkets, photographs, and letters, each item a thread in the tapestry of her life. Some brought smiles, others brought tears, but together they represented a past she had been reluctant to confront. Today, however, Clara had decided it was time to let go. Clara's decision hadn't come easily. She had spent years holding on to things, not just physical belongings, but memories, grudges, and regrets. They had weighed her down, their presence like invisible chains that kept her tethered to the past. But a recent conversation with Elise had planted a seed of change. Over coffee, Elise had shared how she'd cleared out her childhood home, releasing items she'd clung to for years. It felt like breathing fresh air for the first time, Elise had said. Clara wanted to feel that too. The first item she pulled from the box was a photograph of her and Daniel, an old boyfriend she hadn't spoken to in years. The picture was from a summer trip to the mountains, both of them smiling, arms slung around each other. Clara traced the edges of the photo, memories flooding back. Their relationship had been a mix of joy and pain, a whirlwind that had ended in heartbreak. For years, she had held onto the photo, unable to part with the hope it represented. But as she looked at it now, she realized it was time to release not just the image, but the lingering feelings tied to it. Clara placed the photo in a pile for items to be discarded, a small but significant act of letting go. The process was slow and deliberate, each item prompting reflection. A stack of letters from a childhood friend who had drifted away reminded her of the beauty of impermanence. A cracked mug she had once loved but no longer used symbolized the importance of making space for the new. With each decision, Clara felt a growing sense of lightness, as if she were shedding layers of herself that no longer served her. The act of letting go extended beyond the physical. As Clara worked through the box, she found herself revisiting emotional baggage she had carried for years. There were regrets, choices she wished she had made differently, opportunities she felt she had missed. There were grudges, resentments she had nursed against people who had hurt her. And there were fears of failure, of rejection, of not being enough. Clara realized that holding on to these emotions had only amplified their weight, keeping her trapped in a cycle of pain and longing. To help process these feelings, Clara turned to her journal. She wrote letters to people she had held grudges against, expressing her feelings with honesty and clarity. She didn't intend to send the letters. They were for her own healing. In one letter, she forgave a former colleague who had taken credit for her work. In another, she acknowledged the hurt caused by a friend who had betrayed her trust. With each word, Clara felt a release, as if the act of writing was untangling the knots in her heart. One of the most powerful moments came when Clara wrote a letter to herself. She apologized for the harsh judgments she had placed on her own choices, for the time she had pushed herself too hard or ignored her own needs. She promised to be kinder, to give herself the grace she so readily offered to others. The letter became a turning point, a symbol of her commitment to letting go of self-blame and embracing self-compassion. As the days passed, Clara began to notice subtle but profound changes. She felt lighter, freer, more present. Without the clutter, both physical and emotional, she had more space to focus on what truly mattered. She found herself laughing more easily, connecting more deeply with friends, and approaching challenges with a newfound resilience. Letting go, she realized, wasn't about forgetting or erasing the past. It was about making peace with it and choosing to move forward. One afternoon, Clara decided to take a walk by the river. The water flowed steadily, its surface glinting in the sunlight. She paused on a small wooden bridge, watching as leaves and twigs floated downstream. The river reminded her of the lessons she had been learning. Just as the water carried debris away, life, too, required a flow, a willingness to release what no longer served and trust in the journey ahead. Inspired by the river's symbolism, Clara created a small ritual to mark her progress. She wrote down the things she was ready to let go of, regrets, fears, and grudges, on slips of paper. Standing by the river's edge, she read each one aloud, then released it into the water. As the slips of paper floated away, Clara felt a sense of closure, a quiet affirmation that she was no longer defined by the weight of her past. Chapter 7. The Strength Found in Stillness. The quiet of the early morning felt like a sanctuary. Clara sat cross-legged on her living room floor, the soft glow of a single candle casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, the city was just beginning to stir, the faint hum of traffic a distant backdrop to the stillness she had carved out for herself. It wasn't always easy to find this space, this pause in the relentless motion of daily life. But over the past weeks, Clara had begun to understand the transformative power of stillness. Her journey toward embracing stillness began on a particularly chaotic day. Work deadlines loomed, her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, and her thoughts felt like an endless carousel of worries. By the time evening arrived, Clara was exhausted but restless, her mind refusing to slow down. That night, as she scrolled aimlessly through her phone, she came across a short video about mindfulness. The speaker's words were simple but striking. Stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of awareness. Intrigued, Clara decided to give mindfulness a try. The next morning, she set her alarm 15 minutes earlier than usual, rolled out a yoga mat in her living room, and sat down in silence. At first, the experience felt awkward. Her mind raced with to-do lists and fleeting anxieties, and she found herself wondering if she was doing it right. But as the minutes passed, Clara noticed a subtle shift. She became aware of the rise and fall of her breath, the gentle rhythm anchoring her to the present moment. It wasn't perfect. Her thoughts continued to wander. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of calm. Encouraged by this small success, Clara made mindfulness a daily practice. Each morning, she dedicated a few minutes to sitting in stillness, focusing on her breath and observing her thoughts without judgment. Over time, this practice became a cornerstone of her routine, a way to ground herself before the demands of the day took hold. The benefits extended beyond the morning. Clara found herself approaching challenges with greater clarity and patience, her reactions less dictated by stress and more guided by intention. One weekend, Clara attended a mindfulness retreat in the countryside. The retreat center was nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by rolling hills and whispering trees. The schedule included guided meditations, silent walks, and reflective journaling. Clara initially felt nervous about the idea of silence. She was used to filling her days with noise and activity. But as the retreat unfolded, she discovered the richness of the quiet. Without the distractions of technology and constant stimulation, her senses heightened. She noticed the intricate patterns of leaves, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the soothing sound of a nearby stream. The stillness wasn't empty. It was full of life. During one of the guided meditations, the instructor encouraged the group to visualize a calm lake. "Imagine the surface of the water," the instructor said. "When the wind blows, the ripples distort the reflection. But when the water is still, it mirrors the world perfectly." Clara found herself deeply moved by this metaphor. She realized that her mind often felt like a windswept lake, its surface agitated by stress and distractions. But through stillness, she could quiet the ripples and see her reflection more clearly. The lessons from the retreat stayed with Clara as she returned to her daily life. She began to incorporate moments of stillness into her routine, not just in the mornings but throughout the day. When she felt overwhelmed at work, she took a few minutes to step outside, breathe deeply, and reconnect with the present. When a conversation became heated, she paused to center herself before responding. These small acts of stillness became her anchor, a way to navigate life's turbulence with grace. Clara's newfound appreciation for stillness also deepened her relationships. She realized how often she had been physically present but mentally elsewhere, her thoughts consumed by worries or distractions. Now, she made a conscious effort to be fully present with the people in her life. She listened more intently, her focus on the words and emotions being shared rather than formulating her response. Her friends and family noticed the change, commenting on how much more engaged and attentive she seemed. These moments of connection, born from stillness, brought a new depth to her relationships. One evening, Clara sat on a bench in her favorite park, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the colors reflected in the calm waters of a nearby pond. She thought about how far she had come, how stillness had transformed her perspective. It wasn't just about finding moments of peace. It was about cultivating an inner calm that she could carry with her, regardless of external circumstances. Stillness had become a source of strength, a way to ground herself in a world that often felt overwhelming. As the stars began to emerge, Clara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt the cool evening breeze on her skin, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the quiet hum of life around her. In that moment, she understood that stillness wasn't something to achieve or master. It was simply a state of being, an invitation to pause, to listen, and to reconnect with herself and the world. And in that stillness, she found a profound sense of peace. Chapter 8. Embracing the Flow of Change. The first frost of winter arrived unexpectedly, coating the world in a shimmering layer of white. Clara stood by her kitchen window, a cup of tea warming her hands as she watched the landscape transform before her eyes. Change, she thought, was like the frost, sudden and inevitable, altering everything it touched. She had spent much of her life resisting change, clinging to the familiar out of fear of the unknown. But lately, she had started to wonder if embracing change rather than fearing it, might lead to something greater. Her journey toward this realization began a few weeks earlier during a conversation with her neighbor, Mrs. Patel. The elderly woman had lived in the neighborhood for decades, witnessing its evolution from a sleepy suburb to a bustling urban hub. Despite the rapid changes, Mrs. Patel's warmth and optimism remained constant. "Life is like the seasons," she had said one evening over tea. "Each brings its own challenges and beauty. Resisting the seasons doesn't stop them from coming. Learning to flow with them makes all the difference." Those words lingered with Clara as she navigated her own season of change. Her job was becoming more demanding, her circle of friends was shifting, and she had recently moved into a smaller apartment. At first, she viewed these changes as disruptions, obstacles to the life she had carefully constructed. But slowly, she began to see them as opportunities for growth, nudges from the universe urging her to step out of her comfort zone. One evening, Clara decided to tackle her fear of change head-on. She made a list of the changes she was facing and wrote down the emotions they stirred in her. For each change, she asked herself a simple question: what could this make possible? The answer surprised her. Her smaller apartment, though less spacious, felt cozier and easier to maintain. The shifting dynamics in her friendships were creating room for deeper connections with people who truly aligned with her values. Even her demanding job was pushing her to develop new skills and resilience. Clara also found inspiration in the natural world. She began taking long walks through the park, observing how the trees shed their leaves without resistance, preparing for the stillness of winter. It struck her how gracefully nature embraced change, trusting in the cycles of growth and renewal. She realized that just as the trees let go of their leaves to make way for new growth, she, too, could release what no longer served her. To help herself navigate change more effectively, Clara created a few rituals. One of her favorites was what she called her anchor moments. Each morning, she spent a few minutes grounding herself through meditation, focusing on her breath and repeating a simple affirmation: "I trust in the flow of life." This practice became her anchor, a way to center herself amidst the uncertainty of change. Clara also started a gratitude journal specifically for changes. Each evening, she wrote down one thing she appreciated about the day's shifts, whether big or small. On some days, it was as simple as discovering a new coffee shop near her apartment. On others, it was recognizing her own courage in tackling a difficult situation. Over time, this practice helped her reframe change from something to fear into something to appreciate. One day, Clara came across a story that resonated deeply with her. It was about a sculptor who, when asked how he created such lifelike statues, replied, "I simply remove everything that is not the statue." The story reminded her that change wasn't about losing something. It was about revealing what was essential. This perspective gave her a sense of empowerment, a belief that each change was sculpting her into a more authentic version of herself. As Clara continued to embrace change, she noticed its impact on her relationships. She became more open and adaptable, willing to meet others where they were rather than clinging to how things used to be. Her friends appreciated her newfound flexibility and willingness to grow alongside them. Clara found herself drawn to people who, like her, were navigating their own transformations. Together, they created a community of support and understanding, a reminder that change was a shared human experience. One snowy afternoon, Clara decided to declutter her closet, a symbolic act of letting go. As she sorted through clothes she no longer wore and items that no longer brought her joy, she felt a sense of liberation. Each piece she donated was a step toward embracing the new. When she was finished, her closet felt lighter, more spacious, a reflection of the internal space she was creating for herself. Chapter 9. The Joy of Small Moments. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the tiny kitchen as Clara pulled a golden loaf from the oven. She set it on the counter, the warmth radiating through her fingertips, and took a moment to admire her work. It wasn't a grand achievement, just a loaf of bread, a small triumph in the grand scheme of things, but it filled her with an unexpected sense of pride. It was a reminder that joy often lived in the smallest, simplest moments. Clara's journey to appreciating small joys began during a particularly hectic week. Deadlines loomed, her phone buzzed incessantly, and even her usually peaceful walks felt rushed and burdened by an invisible weight. One evening, as she sat in her cluttered living room, she stumbled upon a podcast about mindfulness. The speaker's words were clear and profound. Happiness isn't found in monumental achievements or distant dreams. It's woven into the fabric of your everyday life, waiting to be noticed. Inspired, Clara decided to experiment with this idea. The next morning, she began her day differently. Instead of scrolling through emails as she sipped her coffee, she stepped outside onto her balcony. The air was cool and crisp, and the sun cast a soft glow over the rooftops. Clara held her cup with both hands, savoring the warmth and rich aroma. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly present, grounded in the quiet beauty of the moment. From that day on, Clara made it a habit to seek out and savor small moments of joy. She discovered them in unexpected places. The first sip of tea on a chilly evening, the feel of grass under her feet during a weekend picnic, the laughter of children playing in the park. These moments didn't demand her attention. They invited it, whispering softly amidst the noise of her busy life. One Sunday, Clara visited a local farmer's market. The stalls were vibrant with color. Piles of oranges and apples, bouquets of fresh flowers, jars of golden honey catching the sunlight. She strolled through the aisles, letting her senses guide her. She paused to sample a slice of perfectly ripe peach, the juice running down her fingers. It was a fleeting moment, but it stayed with her, a reminder of how joy could be found in something as simple as the taste of fresh fruit. Clara began to keep a journal dedicated to these moments. Each night before bed, she wrote down 3 things that had brought her joy that day. At first, her entries were modest. The sound of rain on the windows, a kind smile from a stranger, the scent of lavender in my tea. But as the days turned into weeks, her lists grew more detailed and vibrant. She started to notice patterns, how the colors of the evening sky made her heart lift, how the first bite of a meal often felt like a tiny celebration. The practice of noticing and recording these moments began to shift Clara's perspective. She found herself looking for joy throughout her day, her senses attuned to the world around her. She realized that while she couldn't control every aspect of her life, she could choose to focus on the moments that made her smile. In doing so, she began to cultivate a sense of gratitude and presence that carried her through even the most challenging days. One afternoon, Clara visited her friend Elise, who had recently adopted a puppy. The small dog, a ball of energy and fluff, bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. Clara laughed as the puppy climbed into her lap, licking her face with unabashed enthusiasm. In that moment, she felt a pure, unfiltered joy that reminded her of the simplicity of happiness. It wasn't about grand gestures or life-changing events. It was about being present, open, and willing to embrace the moment. Clara also found joy in rediscovering old hobbies. She dusted off her watercolor set and began painting again, not with the goal of creating a masterpiece, but simply for the pleasure of watching colors blend and flow. She started baking more often, experimenting with new recipes and savoring the satisfaction of creating something with her hands. These activities became her sanctuary, a way to reconnect with herself and the world in a tangible, joyful way. As Clara embraced the joy of small moments, she noticed a ripple effect in her relationships. Her newfound appreciation for life's simple pleasures made her more present and attentive with the people she cared about. She found herself laughing more freely, sharing her joy with others, and creating memories that felt authentic and meaningful. Her friends and family, in turn, responded with warmth and gratitude, deepening their connections. Chapter 10. The Power of Patience. The winter winds howled outside Clara's window as she sat curled up in her favorite armchair, a warm blanket draped over her legs and a book resting in her lap. The tea in her mug had grown lukewarm, forgotten as her thoughts wandered. Patience was not a virtue Clara had always valued. She had lived much of her life in a state of urgency, rushing to meet deadlines, chasing goals, and yearning for quick resolutions to life's challenges. But the past few months had taught her that patience wasn't just a passive act of waiting. It was an active, transformative state of mind. Her journey with patience began during a difficult period at work. A major project she had poured her heart into was delayed indefinitely due to unforeseen circumstances. At first, Clara felt a wave of frustration and helplessness. She found herself obsessively checking her email, hoping for updates that never came, and venting her irritation to anyone who would listen. The uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her tense and distracted. One evening, as she paced her living room, her phone buzzed with a message from Elise. It was a quote from a meditation app they both used. Patience is not simply the ability to wait. It's how we behave while we're waiting. The words stopped Clara in her tracks. She realized that her impatience wasn't helping the situation. It was only adding to her stress. If she couldn't control the timeline, perhaps she could control her response to it. The next morning, Clara decided to approach the delay differently. Instead of obsessing over the lack of progress, she shifted her focus to what she could control. She revisited the project, fine-tuning details and brainstorming ideas to improve it further. She used the extra time to learn new skills that could enhance her work. Slowly, her frustration gave way to a sense of purpose. The delay, she realized, was an opportunity in disguise. Clara also began to practice patience in her personal life. She had always been quick to react, whether it was interrupting a conversation to share her thoughts or rushing to fix a problem for a friend. But now, she made a conscious effort to pause and listen, to give situations the space to unfold naturally. This shift wasn't easy. Her instinct to act often bubbled to the surface. But with time, she found that patience deepened her relationships, allowing her to connect with others on a more meaningful level. One weekend, Clara attended a pottery class at a local studio. She had always admired the artistry of handmade ceramics and wanted to try her hand at it. The instructor, a soft-spoken man named Samuel, began the class by emphasizing the importance of patience. Clay has its own rhythm, he said. You can't rush it. You have to work with it, not against it. As Clara shaped the clay on the potter's wheel, she quickly understood what Samuel meant. The clay resisted her at first, wobbling and collapsing under her hands. Her initial attempts were messy and uneven, and she felt the familiar sting of frustration. But Samuel encouraged her to keep going, reminding her that mastery took time. It's not about perfection, he said. It's about presence. Over the course of the class, Clara learned to slow down and trust the process. She discovered the joy of working with the clay, of feeling its texture and responding to its movements. By the end of the day, she had created a small, imperfect bowl that she was surprisingly proud of. The experience stayed with her, a reminder that patience wasn't just a skill, it was an art. As winter turned to spring, Clara began to notice the ways patience enriched her daily life. She found herself lingering over her morning coffee, savoring the quiet moments before the day began. She started tending to a small herb garden on her balcony, watching with wonder as tiny shoots emerged from the soil. The slow, steady growth of the plants mirrored her own journey, teaching her to appreciate the beauty of gradual progress. Patience also transformed the way Clara approached her goals. In the past, she had often set ambitious deadlines for herself, pushing relentlessly to achieve them. But now, she allowed herself the time and space to grow into her aspirations. She celebrated small milestones along the way, recognizing that success wasn't a destination but a series of steps. This shift in perspective brought her a sense of peace and fulfillment that she hadn't experienced before. One sunny afternoon, Clara met Elise for a walk in the park. As they strolled along the winding paths, their conversation turned to the topic of patience. Elise shared how she had learned to be patient with herself during a challenging period of self-discovery. It's not just about waiting for things to happen, Elise said. It's about being kind to yourself in the meantime. Clara nodded, reflecting on her own journey. She realized that patience wasn't just about enduring external delays. It was also about cultivating inner resilience. It was about trusting that things would unfold in their own time and having the courage to stay present in the process. It was about letting go of the need for immediate results and embracing the beauty of the moment. As the weeks went by, Clara continued to practice patience in all aspects of her life. She found joy in the rhythm of her days, in the small but meaningful steps she took toward her goals. She discovered that patience wasn't a passive act of waiting, but an active choice to live with intention and grace. And in that choice, she found a deeper sense of happiness and peace. One evening, as Clara sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she felt a profound sense of contentment. The sky was painted in shades of gold and lavender, the colors shifting gradually as the sun dipped below the horizon. She thought about all the moments she might have missed if she had been too focused on the future, too impatient to appreciate the present. But now, she saw them for what they were, gifts, quietly unfolding in their own time. Clara whispered a quiet affirmation to herself. I trust in the timing of my life, knowing that patience will guide me to where I'm meant to be. And as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, she felt a deep sense of alignment, ready to embrace whatever came next. Chapter 11. The Strength of Vulnerability. The sky was overcast as Clara walked into the community center for the monthly book club meeting. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and her jacket still carried a few stray droplets from the storm she had walked through. Clara loved the book club. It was one of the few places where she felt truly seen. The room was a patchwork of personalities. Young professionals, retirees, parents juggling busy schedules. Yet they all shared a love of stories. Today's discussion, however, wasn't about the book they'd read. Instead, it was about something much deeper. The group's leader, an exuberant woman named Margot, had chosen the theme of vulnerability as the topic of discussion. We've read about characters who bare their souls, Margot began, her voice filled with warmth. Now let's talk about what that looks like in our own lives. How do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable? And what does it teach us? Clara listened as the group began to share their stories. One woman spoke about the fear of starting over after a divorce. A man shared his struggle with opening up about his mental health. As each person spoke, Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had always admired the bravery it took to be vulnerable, yet she had spent much of her life avoiding it. She had learned early on that vulnerability could lead to rejection or hurt, and she had built walls to protect herself. But listening to the group, she began to wonder if those walls were keeping her from something important. That evening, Clara decided to explore the idea of vulnerability in her journal. She wrote about her fears of being judged, of showing weakness, of not being enough. But as she poured her thoughts onto the page, she began to see vulnerability in a new light. It wasn't just about exposing wounds. It was about showing up as her authentic self, imperfections and all. It was about courage, not weakness. Over the following weeks, Clara made small but significant efforts to practice vulnerability. She started by sharing her feelings more openly with Elise. One evening, as they sipped tea in Clara's living room, Clara admitted that she often felt overwhelmed by her own expectations. I'm always trying to be perfect, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But it's exhausting. Elise reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. You don't have to be perfect, she said gently. I love you just as you are. Clara felt a wave of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Her vulnerability hadn't pushed Elise away. It had drawn them closer. Encouraged by this experience, Clara began to open up in other areas of her life. At work, she admitted when she needed help instead of trying to do everything on her own. In her friendships, she spoke honestly about her hopes and fears instead of hiding behind a mask of confidence. These acts of vulnerability were uncomfortable at first, but they brought a sense of connection and authenticity that Clara hadn't felt in years. One day, Clara volunteered to share a personal story at a storytelling event hosted by the community center. The idea terrified her. Standing in front of a room full of strangers and baring her soul felt like the ultimate test of vulnerability. But Clara knew it was an opportunity to grow. She chose to share a story about a time when she had failed spectacularly, a job interview that had gone so badly she'd wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. She spoke about how that failure had taught her resilience and the importance of self-compassion. As she spoke, Clara felt her nerves melt away. The audience wasn't judging her. They were listening with empathy and encouragement. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and several people approached her afterward to thank her for sharing. One woman said, "Your story reminded me that it's okay to fail, as long as we keep trying." Clara left the event feeling lighter, her fear of vulnerability replaced by a sense of empowerment. Vulnerability also transformed Clara's relationship with herself. She started practicing self-compassion, treating herself with the same kindness and understanding she offered to others. When she made mistakes, she resisted the urge to criticize herself harshly. Instead, she reminded herself that imperfection was part of being human. This shift in perspective brought a newfound sense of peace and self-acceptance. One evening, Clara found herself reflecting on a quote she had read in a book. "Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection and the path to the life we truly want." She realized how true those words were. By embracing vulnerability, she had deepened her connections with others and with herself. She had learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about having the courage to rise again, to show up, and to keep going. As Clara continued her journey, she discovered that vulnerability wasn't a one-time act, but a way of living. It required ongoing courage and commitment, but it also brought immense rewards. Her relationships grew richer, her sense of self grew stronger, and her life felt more meaningful. She began to see vulnerability not as a risk, but as a gift, one that allowed her to experience life fully and authentically. On a rainy afternoon, as Clara sat by her window watching the drops slide down the glass, she whispered an affirmation to herself. "I embrace vulnerability as a path to connection and growth. I show up as my true self, knowing that I am enough." The words felt like a promise, not just to herself, but to the life she was building, a life rooted in courage, authenticity, and love. Chapter 12. Cultivating a Grateful Heart. The morning sun streamed through Clara's window, casting a warm, golden glow over her small kitchen table. She sat quietly, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, gazing at the notebook in front of her. It was her gratitude journal, a practice she had recently begun but was quickly growing to cherish. Each page held a list of things, big and small, that had brought her joy or comfort in the past days. Today, she had written down 3 simple words: the warmth of sunlight. Gratitude hadn't always come easily to Clara. In the whirlwind of daily life, it was often overshadowed by stress, frustration, and the endless pursuit of goals. She had spent years focusing on what was missing, what needed to be fixed or achieved, and had rarely paused to appreciate what she already had. But that began to change one rainy afternoon when she came across an article about the science of gratitude. The piece described how practicing gratitude could improve mental health, strengthen relationships, and even enhance physical well-being. Intrigued, Claire decided to give it a try. Her first attempt was modest. That evening, she wrote down 3 things she was grateful for: her cozy apartment, a phone call with Elise, and the soothing sound of rain. At first, the exercise felt mechanical, like completing a homework assignment. But as the days turned into weeks, Clara noticed a subtle shift. She began to look for moments of gratitude throughout her day, her mind naturally scanning for things to appreciate. It was as if she were training her brain to see the world through a lens of abundance rather than scarcity. One day, Clara's gratitude practice deepened in an unexpected way. She was walking through the park when she noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench, feeding a flock of pigeons. His face was lit with a serene smile, his movements slow and deliberate. Clara couldn't help but wonder what had brought him such contentment. She approached him and struck up a conversation. The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Harris, shared that he came to the park every day to feed the birds and reflect on the blessings in his life. "It's the little things," he said, his voice steady and calm. "A kind word, a sunny day, the sound of laughter. Those are the moments that make life beautiful." Clara walked away from that encounter with a newfound appreciation for the simplicity of gratitude. Inspired by Mr. Harris, she began to focus not just on grand gestures or significant events, but on the small, often overlooked joys that filled her days. The smell of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, the vibrant colors of flowers at the market, the comforting weight of her cat curled up on her lap. These became the treasures she recorded in her journal. Gratitude also began to transform Clara's relationships. She realized how often she had taken the people in her life for granted, focusing on minor annoyances or unmet expectations rather than the love and support they offered. She started expressing her appreciation more openly, sending heartfelt messages to friends and family to let them know how much they meant to her. The responses she received were overwhelmingly positive, deepening her connections and creating a ripple effect of kindness. One evening, Clara decided to host a small dinner party to celebrate her gratitude practice. She invited a few close friends and asked each of them to bring a dish and share something they were grateful for. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, filled with laughter and heartfelt stories. As the evening wore on, Clara felt a profound sense of connection and abundance. It was a reminder that gratitude wasn't just a solitary practice. It was a way of fostering community and shared joy. As Clara continued her journey, she encountered moments that tested her ability to remain grateful. There were days when stress and setbacks threatened to overshadow her practice, when finding even a single point of gratitude felt like a Herculean task. But during those times, she leaned on a simple mantra: there is always something to be grateful for. Whether it was the support of a friend, a lesson learned from a challenge, or even just the ability to take a deep breath, Clara found that gratitude could anchor her, even in the stormiest of days. One particularly challenging week, Clara stumbled upon a gratitude exercise that resonated deeply with her. The exercise involved writing a letter of thanks to someone who had made a significant impact on her life. Clara chose to write to her high school art teacher, Mrs. Langston, who had encouraged her creativity and believed in her potential at a time when she doubted herself. As Clara poured her heart into the letter, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mix of nostalgia, appreciation, and a sense of closure. After finishing the letter, Clara decided to deliver it in person. She tracked down Mrs. Langston, who was now retired, and visited her modest home on a quiet street. The reunion was filled with warmth and tears, and Mrs. Langston's gratitude for Clara's words was palpable. That experience reinforced for Clara the power of expressing gratitude, not just in thought but in action. Clara's gratitude practice also brought her a deeper sense of presence. She found herself savoring moments she might once have rushed through. The first sip of coffee in the morning, the way sunlight danced on the walls, the sound of wind rustling through the trees. These moments became her anchors, grounding her in the present and reminding her of the beauty that surrounded her. One evening, as Clara sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she reflected on how far she had come. Gratitude had become more than a daily habit. It had become a way of life. It had taught her to see abundance where she once saw lack, to focus on connection rather than isolation, and to find joy in the ordinary. She whispered a quiet affirmation to herself: I cultivate a grateful heart, embracing the beauty and abundance in every moment. As the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges and uncertainties, but she also knew that gratitude would always be her guiding light, illuminating the path ahead. Chapter 13. The Beauty of Forgiveness. The soft hum of the city outside Clara's window was a familiar melody, but tonight it felt distant, almost soothing. She sat at her desk, a pen poised over a blank sheet of paper, her thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a brisk wind. Forgiveness. The word felt heavy, burdened with memories and emotions she had tried to avoid. Yet, here she was, ready to confront what she had avoided for so long. Forgiveness hadn't come naturally to Clara. She had spent years holding on to grudges and nursing wounds, believing that doing so would protect her from further pain. But over time, she had come to see that her refusal to forgive was only hurting herself. The resentment she carried was like a weight she couldn't put down, a shadow that followed her wherever she went. It clouded her relationships, her self-esteem, and even her sense of peace. Her journey toward forgiveness began with a single conversation. Elise, ever the voice of wisdom, had asked her one evening, what would it feel like to let go? Not for them, but for you. The question lingered in Clara's mind long after their conversation ended. She realized she had been clinging to her anger as if it were a shield, but instead of protecting her, it was keeping her from moving forward. The first step Clara took was to understand what forgiveness truly meant. It wasn't about condoning the hurt or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about releasing the hold that pain had on her life. It was about freeing herself, not absolving the other person. This distinction made the idea of forgiveness feel less daunting, more attainable. Clara decided to start small. She thought about a minor disagreement she'd had with a coworker, an argument over something trivial that had left a sour taste in her mouth. One evening, she wrote a letter to this coworker, not with the intention of sending it, but as a way to articulate her feelings. She wrote about the frustration she had felt, the things she wished she had said, and finally the understanding she had gained. By the time she finished, Clara felt a sense of relief. The act of putting her feelings into words had helped her release them. Encouraged by this experience, Clara turned her attention to a more significant wound, the betrayal of a close friend years ago. This was harder. The pain felt deeper, more entrenched. But Clara knew she couldn't truly move forward without addressing it. She started by acknowledging her emotions, allowing herself to feel the hurt and anger without judgment. She wrote another letter, pouring her heart onto the page. This time, the process was more emotional but also more cathartic. By the end, she felt a small but noticeable shift, as if a tiny crack had appeared in the wall she had built around her heart. As Clara continued her journey, she discovered the power of empathy in the process of forgiveness. She began to reflect on the people who had hurt her, not to excuse their actions but to understand them. She considered their circumstances, their struggles, and the pain they might have been carrying. This wasn't easy. It required a level of compassion she hadn't always felt ready to give, but it helped her see the humanity in those who had wronged her. And in seeing their humanity, she was able to reconnect with her own. One day, Clara came across a story that deeply resonated with her. It was about a man who had forgiven the driver responsible for a car accident that had claimed his family's lives. When asked how he could forgive something so devastating, the man replied, "Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about choosing peace over pain, freedom over bitterness." Those words stayed with Clara, a reminder of the strength and courage it took to forgive. Clara also began to practice self-forgiveness, a concept she hadn't fully considered before. She realized that much of the guilt and shame she carried stemmed from her own perceived failures and mistakes. She had been so hard on herself, holding herself to impossible standards and berating herself when she fell short. But as she delved deeper into the practice of forgiveness, she saw that she needed to extend the same compassion to herself that she was learning to give others. One evening, Clara stood in front of the mirror and spoke aloud to her reflection. "I forgive you," she said, her voice trembling, "for the mistakes you've made, for the times you've doubted yourself, for the ways you've held yourself back. I forgive you." Tears streamed down her face as she repeated the words, each repetition a little steadier, a little more certain. It was a turning point, a moment of profound healing. Forgiveness also brought unexpected gifts to Clara's relationships. She noticed that as she let go of resentment, she became more open and present with the people in her life. Her conversations felt lighter, her connections deeper. She even found herself reconnecting with people she hadn't spoken to in years, mending old rifts and building new bridges. One sunny afternoon, Clara visited a quiet park and sat by the edge of a small pond. She brought with her a handful of pebbles, each one representing a grievance she had been carrying. One by one, she held the pebbles in her hand, reflected on their significance, and then gently tossed them into the water. She watched as the ripples spread outward, carrying her burdens away. By the time she had thrown the last pebble, Clara felt lighter, freer, as if she had made space for something new. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara closed her eyes and whispered a quiet affirmation. I choose forgiveness, for myself and for others. I release the pain of the past and open my heart to peace and healing. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of relief, as if she had finally put down a heavy load she had been carrying for far too long. Forgiveness, Clara realized, wasn't a destination but a journey, one that required patience, courage, and compassion. But it was a journey worth taking, one that brought her closer to herself and to the life she wanted to live. And in the quiet beauty of that evening, she knew she was on her way. Chapter 14. The Gift of Letting Go. The early morning mist clung to the rolling hills as Clara wandered through the meadow near her childhood home. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-covered grass and wildflowers. She had come here seeking clarity, her thoughts as tangled as the vines crawling up the old wooden fence nearby. Letting go, it was a concept she had wrestled with for years. It sounded so simple, yet it felt impossibly hard. Clara's journey to understanding the power of letting go began with a single question Elise had posed during one of their late-night talks. What are you holding on to that no longer serves you? The question lingered in Clara's mind like a faint melody, resurfacing whenever she felt the weight of her unresolved emotions. She realized that much of her pain and frustration came from clinging to things she couldn't change: past mistakes, broken relationships, and unmet expectations. One afternoon, Clara decided to confront these feelings head-on. She sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper and wrote down everything she was holding on to. The list grew longer than she had expected. Regrets over opportunities she hadn't pursued, resentment toward people who had hurt her, and even a deep sense of inadequacy that had followed her since childhood. Seeing it all laid out before her was both overwhelming and liberating. For the first time, she could name the burdens she had been carrying. Clara's first step toward letting go was acknowledging that some things were simply beyond her control. She thought about a friendship that had ended abruptly years ago, leaving her with unanswered questions and lingering sadness. She had spent countless hours replaying their last conversation, wondering what she could have done differently. But now, she began to see that holding on to this pain wasn't bringing her closure. It was keeping her stuck. Clara decided to write a letter to her former friend, not to send but to express the feelings she had buried for so long. As she wrote, she felt a sense of release, as if the act of putting her emotions into words was lifting a weight off her shoulders. Letting go, Clara realized, wasn't just about releasing the past. It was also about making space for the present. She began to practice mindfulness, focusing on the here and now rather than dwelling on what had been or what might be. During her morning walks, she paid attention to the sensations around her: the sound of birdsong, the feel of the ground beneath her feet, the warmth of the sun on her face. These moments of presence reminded her that life was unfolding in the present, not in the shadows of the past or the uncertainty of the future. Clara also discovered the importance of forgiveness in the process of letting go. She thought about the people who had hurt her and the grievances she had held onto for years. At first, the idea of forgiving them felt impossible. But as she explored the concept further, she realized that forgiveness wasn't about condoning their actions. It was about freeing herself from the grip of anger and resentment. Clara began to see forgiveness as a gift she could give herself, a way to reclaim her peace and move forward. One evening, Clara came across a story that resonated deeply with her. It was about a woman who had carried a heavy stone in her backpack for years, believing it was her responsibility to bear the weight. One day, she met a traveler who asked her why she carried the stone. The woman realized she didn't have a good answer. She had simply grown used to the burden. Inspired by the story, Clara imagined herself carrying a similar stone, the weight of her regrets and grudges. She pictured herself setting the stone down, feeling the lightness and freedom that came with letting it go. Clara also learned to let go of perfectionism, a trait that had often held her back. She had always set high standards for herself, striving to meet every expectation and avoid every mistake. But over time, she began to see that her pursuit of perfection was rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. By letting go of these fears, she allowed herself to embrace imperfection as a natural part of life. She began to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and grow. As Clara continued her journey, she noticed the ripple effects of letting go in her relationships. She became more patient and understanding, less reactive to minor conflicts or misunderstandings. She found herself listening more deeply, focusing on the connection rather than the disagreement. This shift brought a sense of harmony to her interactions, strengthening her bonds with the people she cared about. One particularly transformative experience came during a yoga retreat Clara attended. The instructor guided the group through a meditation on letting go, encouraging them to visualize releasing whatever was weighing them down. Clara closed her eyes and imagined a balloon rising into the sky, carrying her worries and regrets with it. As she watched it disappear into the distance, she felt a profound sense of liberation, as if she were finally free to move forward without the chains of the past holding her back. Letting go also opened Clara's heart to new possibilities. She started saying yes to opportunities she might have once avoided out of fear or self-doubt. She joined a local art class, reconnected with an old friend, and even volunteered to lead a project at work. These experiences brought her a sense of fulfillment and joy, reminding her that letting go wasn't just about releasing pain. It was about embracing life. As Clara stood in the meadow that morning, the mist beginning to lift, she took a deep breath and felt a quiet sense of peace. She thought about all the things she had let go of, the space she had created for herself to grow and thrive. She whispered a simple affirmation: "I release what no longer serves me," creating space for joy, growth, and possibility. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm light over the hills. Clara smiled, knowing that letting go wasn't a one-time act, but an ongoing practice, a way of living with openness and grace. And as she walked back toward the path that led home, she felt lighter, freer, and ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Chapter 15. The Art of Saying No. The hum of conversation filled the room as Clara sat at the edge of the gathering, her cup of tea cooling in her hands. She was here at the request of a colleague, attending yet another community event she didn't feel particularly passionate about. The tight smile on her face hid her true feelings: exhaustion, a sense of overwhelm, and the nagging question she had been avoiding for months. Why was it so hard for her to say no? Clara's struggle with saying no had started early in life. She had always been the dependable one, the friend who could be counted on to help with last-minute plans, the colleague who picked up extra work, the neighbor who always said yes to babysitting or organizing events. While these traits made her reliable and well-liked, they also left her drained and with little time for herself. Clara had built a life centered around pleasing others, often at the expense of her own well-being. One evening, as she sat at her cluttered desk trying to catch up on work she had agreed to take on, she came across an article titled "The Power of No." The headline caught her attention, and she began to read. The piece described how saying no wasn't an act of selfishness, but one of self-respect. It was about setting boundaries, protecting one's time and energy, and allowing space for the things that truly mattered. Clara felt a spark of recognition. She realized that her constant yes weren't just a response to others' requests. They were a way of avoiding conflict, seeking approval, and maintaining a sense of control. Determined to make a change, Clara decided to practice saying no. Her first opportunity came the next day when a co-worker asked her to take on an additional project. Clara's initial instinct was to agree, but she paused and took a deep breath. "I appreciate you thinking of me," she said, "but I'm already at capacity with my current workload. I won't be able to take this on." The words felt awkward and unfamiliar, but they also felt empowering. To her surprise, her co-worker didn't react negatively. They simply thanked her and moved on. Encouraged by this small victory, Clara began to set clearer boundaries in other areas of her life. She declined invitations to events she didn't feel passionate about, gently but firmly explained her limits to friends and family, and even started carving out dedicated time for herself. These decisions weren't always easy. Clara often felt a pang of guilt, wondering if she was disappointing others or missing opportunities. But over time, she began to see the positive impact these boundaries had on her life. One evening, Elise invited Clara to a group outing that involved hiking a particularly challenging trail. Clara loved spending time with Elise, but she was also looking forward to a quiet weekend at home after a hectic week. For the first time, she felt comfortable expressing her needs. "I'd love to join you another time," Clara said, "but I really need some downtime this weekend." Elise's response was understanding and supportive, a reminder that true friends respected boundaries. As Clara practiced saying no, she also discovered the importance of aligning her yes with her values and priorities. She began to ask herself a simple but powerful question before agreeing to anything. Does this bring me joy, growth, or purpose? If the answer was no, she felt more confident in declining. This shift allowed her to focus her time and energy on the things that truly mattered to her, from nurturing her relationships to pursuing creative hobbies. One transformative moment came during a meeting at work. Clara's team was brainstorming ideas for a new project, and she was asked to lead a subcommittee. In the past, she would have agreed without hesitation, eager to prove her commitment. But this time, she paused to reflect. She realized that taking on the role would stretch her too thin and prevent her from fully contributing to other important projects. "I'm honored that you thought of me," she said, "but I believe someone else might be better suited for this role. I'd be happy to support in a smaller capacity if needed." Her manager appreciated her honesty, and Clara felt a sense of pride in prioritizing her well-being. Clara's journey wasn't without its challenges. She occasionally faced resistance or misunderstanding from people who were used to her always saying yes. But she reminded herself that setting boundaries wasn't about pleasing everyone. It was about living authentically and sustainably. She found solace in the idea that saying no to one thing often meant saying yes to something more meaningful. One sunny afternoon, Clara attended a workshop on personal growth and resilience. The speaker shared a metaphor that resonated deeply with her. "Think of your energy as a jar of marbles," the speaker said. "Each marble represents your time, attention, and resources. When you give away too many marbles without replenishing them, your jar becomes empty. But when you protect your marbles and use them wisely, you have more to give to the things and people that matter most." This metaphor stayed with Clara, guiding her as she continued to navigate the balance between generosity and self-care. She began to see her boundaries not as walls, but as bridges, creating space for deeper connections and more intentional living. By saying no to what didn't align with her values, she was saying yes to a life that felt fulfilling and true. One evening, as Clara reflected on her journey, she wrote in her journal, "Saying no is an act of courage and self-love. It's a way of honoring my time, my energy, and my needs, and in doing so, I create space for what truly matters." The words felt like a promise, a commitment to herself and the life she was building. As the stars lit up the night sky, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She knew that the path she had chosen wouldn't always be easy, but it was a path worth walking. And with each step, she was learning to embrace the art of saying no, not as a rejection of others, but as an affirmation of herself. Chapter 16. Finding Joy in the Little Things. The sunlight streaming through Clara's window was warm and golden, casting soft shadows across her kitchen table. She sat quietly, stirring a spoonful of honey into her tea, her gaze fixed on the delicate swirl of liquid in the mug. It was a simple moment, unremarkable to anyone but her, yet it filled her with a surprising sense of contentment. In that instant, she realized the power of finding joy in the little things, the fleeting moments that often go unnoticed but hold the potential to brighten an entire day. Clara's journey toward appreciating the small joys in life began during a particularly challenging time. Work was demanding, her social calendar felt overwhelming, and the weight of unspoken expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. She found herself rushing from one task to the next, constantly looking forward to future milestones while missing the moments unfolding before her. It wasn't until a quiet afternoon spent with her grandmother that she began to see the world differently. Her grandmother, a woman of quiet wisdom and endless patience, had spent decades cultivating an appreciation for the everyday. During their visit, she had paused to admire the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves of an old oak tree in her backyard. "Do you see that?" she had asked Clara, her voice soft and filled with wonder. "How beautiful it is! Sometimes the best moments are the simplest ones." Those words stayed with Clara, echoing in her mind during moments of stillness. She began to notice the things she had overlooked for so long: the crispness of the air on her morning walks, the way her cat's fur felt soft and warm beneath her fingers, the satisfaction of a well-cooked meal. These small, everyday moments didn't require planning or effort. They simply required her attention. Clara decided to make a conscious effort to seek out these moments of joy. She started keeping a small notebook, a joy journal, where she recorded one thing each day that made her smile or brought her a sense of peace. At first, the entries were sporadic and hesitant. "A good cup of coffee," she wrote one morning. "The sound of rain on the roof." But as the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself actively looking for these moments, her journal filling with observations and memories that painted a picture of quiet happiness. One Saturday, Clara took a walk through the park with Elise. The two friends wandered aimlessly, chatting about their week, when they came across a group of children flying kites. The colorful shapes danced in the sky, their tails trailing behind like ribbons in the wind. Clara couldn't help but smile at the sight. "Isn't it amazing," she said to Elise, "how something so simple can bring so much joy?" Elise nodded, her face bright with agreement. "It's like they're in their own little world. No stress, no deadlines, just pure fun." The two friends stood there for a while, watching the kites soar higher and higher. For Clara, it was a reminder that happiness didn't always have to be grand or complicated. Sometimes it was as simple as standing in a park on a sunny day. Clara also began to cultivate small rituals that brought her joy. She lit a candle each evening as she settled down with a book, savoring the warm glow and gentle flicker of the flame. She started baking on Sunday afternoons, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread filling her apartment. These rituals became anchors in her day, grounding her in the present and reminding her of the beauty in routine. At work, Clara found herself sharing her newfound perspective with her colleagues. During a particularly hectic week, she suggested they take a few minutes to step outside and get some fresh air. Reluctantly, her team agreed, and they gathered on the office terrace, sipping coffee and chatting as they watched the city below. It was a small gesture, but it brought a sense of camaraderie and calm to an otherwise stressful day. "You're right," her manager had said afterward. "Sometimes we just need to step back and breathe." One of the most transformative moments for Clara came during a rainy afternoon spent at a local art gallery. She had always loved art, but rarely took the time to explore it. That day, she wandered through the exhibits, her mind quiet and open. She stopped in front of a painting that depicted a serene countryside, the colors soft and dreamlike. Something about it spoke to her, evoking a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Clara spent nearly an hour in front of the painting, lost in its details and the emotions it stirred within her. That experience inspired Clara to seek out more opportunities for quiet joy. She visited botanical gardens, attended poetry readings, and spent hours sketching in her notebook, even though she didn't consider herself much of an artist. These moments weren't about achieving anything or meeting expectations. They were simply about being present and finding beauty in the ordinary. Clara's journey also taught her the importance of gratitude. She began to express her appreciation more openly, thanking the barista who made her coffee, the neighbor who held the elevator for her, and the friend who sent her a kind message on a tough day. These small acts of gratitude not only brightened her own day, but often brought a smile to someone else's face. As Clara sat at her kitchen table that morning, her joy journal opened beside her. She reflected on how much her perspective had shifted. Life hadn't become easier or less complicated, but it had become richer, more colorful. She realized that the little things she once overlooked were now the moments she cherished most. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Today, I am grateful for the sunlight, for the tea warming my hands, and for the quiet moments that remind me to breathe." The words felt simple but profound, a testament to the power of noticing, appreciating, and embracing the beauty of everyday life. Chapter 17. The Strength in Simplicity. The gentle hum of the countryside filled Clara's ears as she wandered along a winding dirt path bordered by tall grass and wildflowers. A soft breeze carried the scent of lavender from a nearby field, and the sky stretched endlessly above her in a perfect, uninterrupted blue. It was a stark contrast to the bustling city she'd left behind, where life seemed to move at a relentless pace. Here, in the simplicity of nature, Clara found herself breathing more deeply, her thoughts unspooling like threads from a tightly wound spool. This trip to the countryside hadn't been planned. It was an impulsive decision after weeks of feeling overwhelmed by her responsibilities at work and the endless to-do list that seemed to multiply overnight. Elise had suggested the getaway, insisting that Clara needed a break. "Sometimes," Elise had said, "you have to strip everything back to find what really matters." As Clara walked, she thought about Elise's words. Simplicity. It sounded easy, but it was a concept Clara had struggled with for most of her life. She had always equated complexity with success, believing that a full schedule, a long list of accomplishments, and constant activity were signs of a life well lived. But the more she tried to juggle, the more she felt like she was losing herself in the chaos. Clara's first realization about the power of simplicity came during her first night at the small cottage she'd rented for the weekend. The space was modest, a single room with a wooden table, a cozy bed, and a tiny kitchen. There was no television, no Wi-Fi, and only a stack of well-worn books for entertainment. At first, the absence of distractions made Clara restless. She kept reaching for her phone, only to remember there was no signal. But as the hours passed, she began to settle into the quiet. She lit a candle, made herself a simple dinner of bread and cheese, and sat by the window watching the stars emerge one by one. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly present. The next morning, Clara decided to explore the area. She found a small farmer's market on the edge of the village, where vendors sold fresh produce, handmade crafts, and jars of golden honey. The market was a sensory delight. The vibrant colors of the fruits and vegetables, the rich aroma of freshly baked bread, the cheerful chatter of the locals. Clara bought a basket of strawberries and sat on a nearby bench to enjoy them. The sweetness of the fruit, the warmth of the sun on her face, and the simplicity of the moment filled her with an unexpected sense of contentment. As the weekend unfolded, Clara began to notice how simplicity brought clarity and peace to her mind. She spent her days walking through fields, sketching in her notebook, and reading by the fire. Each activity was unhurried, free from the pressure to accomplish or achieve. She found herself savoring the taste of her meals, the feel of the cool grass beneath her feet, and the sound of birdsong drifting through the open window. These simple pleasures, she realized, were what truly nourished her soul. One afternoon, Clara met an elderly woman named Miriam who lived in a nearby cottage. Miriam invited Clara in for tea, and the two women talked for hours. Miriam's home was a reflection of her philosophy. Every item had a purpose, and every corner radiated warmth and care. "I've learned," Miriam said, "that life is about finding joy in the essentials. You don't need much to be happy, just enough to fill your heart." Miriam's words stayed with Clara as she returned to her own cottage that evening. She thought about all the things she had filled her life with, the material possessions, the commitments, the expectations. How many of them truly mattered? How many of them brought her joy? She began to see that simplicity wasn't about deprivation. It was about intention. It was about making space for what truly mattered by letting go of what didn't. Inspired by her weekend in the countryside, Clara decided to bring the lessons of simplicity back to her everyday life. She started by decluttering her apartment, donating items she no longer used, and organizing her space to reflect her new priorities. She let go of clothes she hadn't worn in years, books she had no intention of reading, and kitchen gadgets that collected dust. The process was liberating, each item removed making her home feel lighter and more inviting. Clara also began simplifying her schedule. She stopped overcommitting herself, learning to say no to obligations that didn't align with her values. She made time for the activities that truly brought her joy, like painting, gardening, and spending time with Elise. By focusing on fewer things, she found that she could give her full attention and energy to what mattered most. One evening, Clara decided to cook dinner for Elise. She chose a simple recipe, a hearty vegetable soup made with fresh ingredients from the farmer's market. As she chopped the vegetables and stirred the pot, she felt a sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced in a long time. The meal wasn't elaborate, but it was made with care and intention. Elise arrived with a bottle of wine, and the two friends spent the evening laughing and talking, their conversation flowing as easily as the soup in their bowls. Clara's commitment to simplicity also transformed her approach to work. She started prioritizing her tasks, focusing on quality rather than quantity. She resisted the urge to multitask, instead giving her full attention to one project at a time. This shift not only improved her productivity, but also made her work feel more meaningful and fulfilling. As weeks turned into months, Clara noticed how her life had changed. The constant buzz of stress and busyness had been replaced by a sense of calm and clarity. She felt more connected to herself and to the world around her. The small moments she once overlooked, the first sip of coffee in the morning, the way the light danced on her living room walls, the sound of rain tapping against the window, had become sources of joy and gratitude. One morning, as Clara sat on her balcony watching the sunrise, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Simplicity, she realized, wasn't about stripping life down to its bare bones. It was about uncovering its essence. It was about finding strength and beauty in the unadorned, the unhurried, and the intentional. Chapter 18. Embracing Change with Grace. The leaves outside Clara's window had begun to shift from green to shades of amber and crimson, a silent but vivid reminder that the season was changing. She watched as a gust of wind carried a cluster of leaves from the branches, sending them spiraling toward the ground. Change, she thought, was as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. And yet, it often arrived with an unwelcome sense of disruption. Clara's relationship with change had always been complicated. She valued routine, the comfort of knowing what to expect. Change, on the other hand, often felt like chaos, stripping away her sense of control and stability. But over the past few months, she had begun to see change through a new lens, not as something to resist, but as an opportunity for growth. Her first major step in embracing change came when her workplace announced a company-wide restructuring. Clara's role wasn't eliminated, but it was altered significantly. The new responsibilities felt daunting, and for weeks she resisted the shift, clinging to the familiar processes and systems she had known for years. It wasn't until a conversation with her mentor, Andrew, that Clara began to rethink her approach. Change is hard, Andrew had said, but it's also what makes growth possible. The key is to focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't. Inspired by his words, Clara decided to lean into the discomfort. She spent time learning the new systems, seeking feedback from her colleagues, and reminding herself that adapting didn't mean losing her identity. Over time, she found a rhythm in her new role, and with it came a sense of accomplishment and confidence she hadn't expected. As she reflected on this experience, Clara began to see how her resistance to change had often held her back in other areas of her life. She thought about the relationships she had clung to long after they had stopped serving her, the opportunities she had turned down out of fear of the unknown, and the dreams she had shelved because they didn't fit neatly into her current reality. Determined to approach change with more grace, Clara began exploring strategies to navigate it effectively. The first was mindfulness. She started incorporating moments of stillness into her day, allowing herself to observe her thoughts and emotions without judgment. When faced with a new challenge or transition, she practiced grounding herself in the present moment, reminding herself that anxiety often stemmed from worrying about the future. Another tool Clara discovered was reframing her perspective. Instead of viewing change as a loss, she began to see it as an opportunity to learn and evolve. She thought back to a story her grandmother had told her about a tree that bent with the wind rather than breaking. Flexibility, her grandmother had said, is what keeps you standing tall. Clara adopted this mindset, reminding herself that adapting didn't mean giving up. It meant growing stronger. Clara also leaned on her support system during times of change. She found solace in talking to Elise, who always offered a listening ear and a fresh perspective. She joined a local book club, where she connected with others who shared her love of literature and found encouragement in their stories of resilience. Through these connections, Clara realized that she didn't have to navigate change alone. There was strength in community. One particularly transformative experience came during a weekend retreat focused on personal growth. The retreat leader, a woman named Sophia, spoke about the concept of letting go to let in. Sophia encouraged the participants to identify one thing they were holding onto that no longer served them and to release it in order to make space for something new. For Clara, that one thing was her fear of failure. She wrote it down on a slip of paper and placed it in the fire pit during a symbolic ceremony. As the paper burned, Clara felt a sense of release, as though she were shedding a layer of self-imposed limitations. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to notice the subtle ways her relationship with change was evolving. She found herself saying yes to opportunities that scared her, like presenting at a conference or trying a new hobby. She also began to approach setbacks with more resilience, viewing them as detours rather than dead ends. When a project at work didn't go as planned, she focused on what she could learn from the experience rather than dwelling on her disappointment. One evening, as Clara sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she reflected on the changes she had navigated in the past year. There had been losses and gains, moments of uncertainty and clarity, but through it all, she had learned to trust herself and the process. She realized that change wasn't something to fear or fight. It was a natural part of life's rhythm, a force that shaped her into the person she was becoming. Clara picked up her journal and wrote, "Change is the river that carries me forward. I may not control its course, but I can choose to flow with it, to learn from it, and to grow because of it." The words felt like a promise, a commitment to embracing life's ebbs and flows with an open heart. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that change would continue to come, as inevitable as the seasons. But now, she welcomed it as a teacher, a guide, and a source of strength. And with each new chapter, she felt more ready than ever to face what lay ahead. Chapter 19, The Power of Routine. The morning sunlight spilled across Clara's bedroom, its golden hues painting the walls in soft warmth. She stirred awake, the gentle sound of birdsong filtering through her open window. Clara had always thought of mornings as chaotic, a rush to get out of bed, gulp down coffee, and race into the day's demands. But lately something had shifted. She had begun to see mornings not as a source of stress, but as an opportunity to set the tone for her day. Her transformation began a few months ago, during a particularly hectic period at work. Deadlines loomed, her inbox overflowed, and each day felt like a mad scramble to keep up. One evening, drained and overwhelmed, Clara had stumbled upon a podcast about the benefits of creating a morning routine. The speaker's words resonated deeply. How you start your day shapes how you live your day. Inspired, Clara decided to give it a try. At first, the idea of a morning routine felt daunting. Clara wasn't a natural early riser, and the thought of waking up even earlier seemed impossible. But she reminded herself that change didn't have to happen all at once. She started small, setting her alarm just 15 minutes earlier than usual. In that extra time, she began experimenting with different activities, stretching, journaling, sipping tea while watching the sunrise. Gradually, those 15 minutes became 30, then 45, until she had carved out a full hour of uninterrupted time for herself each morning. Clara's routine became a sanctuary, a sacred space where she could recharge and prepare for the day ahead. She started each morning by making her bed, a simple act that brought a surprising sense of accomplishment. Next came a few minutes of meditation, her focus on her breath grounding her in the present moment. Afterward, she would brew a cup of coffee and sit by the window, writing in her journal. Some mornings she wrote about her dreams, others about her intentions for the day, or things she was grateful for. The act of putting her thoughts on paper helped her clear her mind and set a positive tone. Exercise also became an integral part of Clara's routine. She discovered a love for yoga, its gentle stretches and deliberate movements waking up her body and calming her mind. On days when she had more energy, she'd go for a brisk walk in the nearby park, savoring the fresh air and the feel of her feet moving rhythmically beneath her. These moments of physical activity left her feeling energized and focused, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. Clara quickly noticed how her morning routine began to ripple through the rest of her day. She felt calmer and more centered, her mind less prone to racing thoughts and stress. At work, she approached tasks with greater clarity and efficiency, her productivity soaring. Even her relationships benefited. She found herself more patient and present with the people around her, her newfound sense of balance creating space for deeper connections. But Clara's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when she overslept or felt too tired to follow her routine, days when the demands of life threatened to derail her progress. In those moments, she reminded herself that perfection wasn't the goal, consistency was. She learned to be gentle with herself, picking up where she left off rather than abandoning her efforts altogether. One weekend, Clara attended a workshop on time management, eager to deepen her understanding of routines and their impact. The speaker shared a powerful insight. Routines are not about rigid schedules. They're about creating rhythms that align with your values and priorities. This perspective resonated deeply with Clara, reinforcing her commitment to her morning practice. Clara also began to experiment with evening routines, recognizing that how she ended her day was just as important as how she started it. She created a wind-down ritual that included turning off her devices an hour before bed, reading a book, and writing a few lines in her gratitude journal. These small acts helped her transition from the busyness of the day to the stillness of the night, her mind and body preparing for restful sleep. As weeks turned into months, Clara's routines became second nature, their benefits extending far beyond the immediate moments of calm and focus they provided. She found herself more resilient in the face of challenges, her sense of purpose and direction strengthening with each passing day. Her routines weren't just habits. They were acts of self-care, a way of honoring her needs and nurturing her well-being. One morning, as Clara sipped her coffee and watched the sun rise over the city, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The chaos and overwhelm that once defined her days had been replaced by a sense of order and intention. She felt more connected to herself, her goals, and the world around her. And she knew that this transformation wasn't the result of any single action, but of the quiet, consistent choices she made each morning. Clara picked up her journal and wrote, "Routines are the foundation of my peace. They ground me, guide me, and give me the strength to face each day with grace and purpose." The words felt like a mantra, a reminder of the power she held to shape her life, one morning at a time. As the day unfolded, Clara carried that sense of intention with her, her routine serving as a steady anchor in the ever-changing tides of life. And in the quiet beauty of her mornings, she found not just a way to start her day, but a way to live her life, with clarity, balance, and unwavering joy. Chapter 20. Gratitude as a Daily Practice. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed Clara's living room in shades of amber and gold. She sat at her small wooden desk, a blank page open in her journal, pen in hand. Gratitude had become her evening ritual, a way to anchor herself amidst the turbulence of life. Tonight, though, she found herself staring at the page, struggling to find the words. The day had been long and filled with challenges. A missed deadline, an argument with a colleague, and an unexpected bill that threw her budget into disarray. Clara sighed, her mind racing with frustrations and worries. Yet, as she gazed out the window, the sight of a neighbor walking their dog caught her attention. The golden retriever's tail wagged enthusiastically, its joy infectious even from a distance. Clara smiled despite herself. In that simple moment, she found a spark of gratitude, not for the events of her day, but for the fleeting joys that reminded her life wasn't all struggle. Her journey with gratitude hadn't always been smooth. When Elise first suggested she try keeping a gratitude journal, Clara had been skeptical. The idea seemed overly simplistic, almost naive. How could jotting down a few positive thoughts make a difference when life felt so overwhelming? But Elise's insistence, paired with her own radiant sense of peace, eventually persuaded Clara to give it a try. Clara's early attempts at gratitude journaling were half-hearted. Her entries were sparse and perfunctory. I'm grateful for coffee. I'm grateful for my bed. It felt forced, a chore rather than a genuine practice. But over time, something shifted. Clara began to dig deeper, reflecting on the nuances of her day and uncovering moments she might otherwise have overlooked. She wrote about the kindness of a stranger who held the door open for her, the warmth of the sun on her skin during a lunchtime walk, and the comforting aroma of her favorite tea. As her practice deepened, Clara noticed subtle but profound changes in her outlook. Gratitude began to weave its way into her daily life, softening the edges of her struggles and amplifying her joys. She found herself pausing to appreciate the small things: the laughter of children playing in the park, the vibrant colors of autumn leaves, the feeling of accomplishment after completing a difficult task. These moments, once fleeting and unnoticed, became sources of nourishment and strength. One particularly transformative moment came during a volunteer event at a local shelter. Clara had signed up to help serve meals, hoping to give back to her community and step outside her own troubles. As she worked alongside other volunteers, she was struck by the resilience and gratitude of the people she met. A young mother thanked her with tears in her eyes for a hot meal and a warm place to sit. An elderly man shared stories of his life, his eyes twinkling with memories despite his current hardships. Clara left the shelter that evening with a renewed sense of perspective. Gratitude, she realized, wasn't just about her own life. It was about recognizing and honoring the interconnectedness of all lives. Determined to deepen her practice, Clara began incorporating gratitude into her interactions with others. She made a point to thank her colleagues for their support, her friends for their companionship, and even the barista who made her morning latte. These small acts of acknowledgement not only brightened the recipient's day, but also reinforced Clara's own sense of appreciation. She discovered that gratitude, when shared, had a way of multiplying, creating ripples of positivity that extended far beyond her immediate circle. Clara also began exploring the science behind gratitude, curious about why it had such a profound impact on her well-being. She learned that practicing gratitude could rewire the brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with positivity and resilience. Studies showed that people who regularly expressed gratitude experienced lower levels of stress, improved relationships, and greater overall happiness. This knowledge reinforced her commitment to the practice, transforming it from a personal habit into a lifelong philosophy. As Clara's understanding of gratitude evolved, so did her methods of practicing it. She expanded her journaling to include not only daily reflections, but also gratitude letters, heartfelt notes to the people who had touched her life in meaningful ways. She wrote to her parents, thanking them for their unwavering support, to Elise for her constant encouragement, and even to her high school art teacher, whose words had inspired her to pursue creativity. These letters, whether sent or simply written for her own reflection, became powerful reminders of the love and connection that surrounded her. One evening, Clara hosted a gratitude dinner for a small group of friends. She asked each guest to share something they were grateful for, creating a space for vulnerability and connection. The conversations that unfolded were rich and heartfelt, filled with stories of triumphs, challenges, and the lessons they had gleaned along the way. As Clara looked around the table, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people in her life and the moments they shared. By the time the season began to shift from autumn to winter, gratitude had become an integral part of Clara's identity. It wasn't a cure-all for life's difficulties, but it was a powerful tool that helped her navigate them with grace and resilience. Even on the hardest days, she found solace in the practice, knowing that gratitude didn't erase pain, but illuminated the beauty that coexisted with it. On this particular evening, as Clara returned her focus to her journal, The words finally began to flow. "Today was hard," she wrote, "but I am grateful for the lessons it brought me. I am grateful for the neighbor's dog who made me smile, for the warmth of my tea, and for the chance to begin again tomorrow." As she closed her journal and prepared for bed, Clara felt a quiet sense of peace. Gratitude, she realized, wasn't about waiting for perfect moments. It was about finding light in the imperfect ones. And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep, her heart full and her mind at ease, ready to embrace whatever the next day might bring. Chapter 21. The Healing Power of Nature. Clara pulled her wool coat tighter as the crisp morning air nipped at her cheeks. The park was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or chirping of birds. She had started taking these morning walks months ago, initially as a way to escape the stress of her daily life. But over time, they had become something more, a sanctuary, a space where she could breathe deeply, reflect, and reconnect with herself. Nature had always held a quiet allure for Clara. As a child, she spent summers exploring her grandparents' farm, her days filled with the scent of freshly turned soil and the sound of wind whispering through the fields. Those moments had left an indelible mark on her, a sense of peace she often longed for but rarely sought in adulthood. Now, as she meandered through the park's winding trails, she felt that familiar calm washing over her. The morning sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, creating dappled patterns on the ground. Clara's footsteps crunched softly against the gravel path, and she let her thoughts drift. She had read recently about the benefits of spending time in nature, how it could lower stress levels, improve focus, and even boost mood. But these walks weren't just about science or wellness trends. They were about feeling alive, connected, and grounded in the present moment. On this particular morning, Clara paused at a small clearing where a wooden bench overlooked a pond. The water was still, reflecting the vibrant colors of the autumn leaves. She sat down, inhaling deeply, and allowed herself to simply exist. No deadlines, no obligations, just the gentle rhythm of her breath and the quiet beauty of the world around her. Her first realization about the healing power of nature came during a particularly challenging week. Overwhelmed by work and personal responsibilities, Clara had decided to spend a Saturday hiking in a nearby forest. At first, she had been distracted, her mind racing with worries. But as the trail led her deeper into the woods, something shifted. The towering trees, the earthy scent of moss, and the sound of a babbling creek began to soothe her frayed nerves. By the time she reached the summit, Clara felt a clarity and peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. The view of the valley below, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, reminded her of the vastness of the world and her place within it. Inspired by that experience, Clara began to incorporate more time in nature into her routine. She discovered new parks and trails, each with its own unique charm. Some days, she strolled along a riverbank, her thoughts flowing as freely as the water. Other days, she wandered through a botanical garden, marveling at the intricate beauty of each flower. These moments weren't grand adventures. They were simple acts of presence, a way of grounding herself in the here and now. Clara also noticed how nature seemed to amplify her sense of gratitude. The sight of a sunrise painting the sky in hues of pink and orange filled her with awe. The sound of leaves crunching beneath her boots brought a childlike joy. Even the rain, with its steady patter against her umbrella, became a reminder of life's rhythms and cycles. These experiences weren't just fleeting pleasures. They were profound reminders of the world's beauty and resilience. One afternoon, Clara decided to join a community gardening group. She had always admired the idea of growing her own food, but had never taken the plunge. The group met weekly in a shared plot, working together to plant, weed, and harvest. Clara found the physical act of gardening deeply therapeutic. The feel of soil between her fingers, the satisfaction of seeing a seedling grow into a flourishing plant. She also cherished the sense of connection she felt with her fellow gardeners, each of them united by a shared purpose and a love for the earth. The garden became a place of learning and discovery. Clara marveled at the intricacies of nature, how the seasons dictated the planting schedule, how pollinators played a vital role in the ecosystem, how even the smallest insects contributed to the garden's health. These lessons extended beyond the garden, teaching her about patience, resilience, and the interconnectedness of all living things. As Clara's relationship with nature deepened, she began to explore ways to bring its healing power into her home. She filled her apartment with potted plants, their greenery adding life and freshness to her space. She started a small herb garden on her windowsill, delighting in the convenience of snipping fresh basil or mint for her meals. Even her artwork began to reflect her love for nature, her sketches and paintings filled with images of trees, flowers, and landscapes. One particularly transformative moment came during a weekend retreat in the mountains. Clara had signed up for the retreat on a whim, unsure of what to expect, but eager for a change of scenery. The weekend was filled with guided hikes, meditation sessions, and quiet reflection. On the final evening, the group gathered around a campfire, sharing stories and insights. As the flames crackled and the stars sparkled above, Clara felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The retreat had reminded her not only of nature's beauty, but also of her own capacity for stillness and introspection. Back home, Clara continued to nurture her connection to nature. She planned trips to national parks, explored nearby forests, and even started a nature photography hobby. Each experience reinforced her belief in the healing power of the natural world. It wasn't just about escaping the stresses of daily life. It was about returning to something essential, something primal and grounding. One evening, as Clara sat by her open window listening to the distant sound of crickets, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Nature had become more than a backdrop to her life. It was a source of inspiration, healing, and joy. It had taught her to slow down, to pay attention, and to appreciate the beauty in the world around her. She picked up her journal and wrote, "Nature is my sanctuary, my teacher, and my guide. In its rhythms, I find peace. In its beauty, I find hope. And in its presence, I find myself." The words felt true and grounding, a testament to the transformative power of the natural world. Chapter 22. The Resilience of Hope. Hope is a quiet strength, often underestimated, yet it holds the power to rebuild lives and carry us through the darkest of times. It doesn't shout or demand attention. Instead, it whispers, urging us to take one more step, to hold on just a little longer. In moments when everything feels lost, hope emerges not as a fleeting emotion, but as an unyielding force that roots itself deeply within the human spirit. Eliza had always believed in hope, though her life had tested that belief time and time again. Growing up in a small, struggling town, she witnessed the resilience of her parents, who worked tirelessly to ensure their children had a better future. Hope was what fueled them, what kept them going even when the odds were stacked against them. Yet, as an adult, Eliza found herself questioning the very thing that had sustained her family. A series of setbacks, losses, failures, heartbreaks, had worn her down, leaving her cynical and wary of the optimism she once embraced. But hope doesn't demand to be believed in. It simply waits, patient and enduring, ready to reignite the moment we choose to let it in. Eliza's turning point came unexpectedly during a quiet evening spent sorting through old belongings. Among the items was a letter from her late grandmother, written during a particularly hard time in her life. The words were simple yet profound. "The night is darkest before the dawn. Hold on, for the dawn always comes." Those words struck a chord deep within her. She began to reflect on the times in her life when hope had carried her forward, even when she wasn't aware of it. She thought of her parents, who faced impossible challenges but never gave up. She thought of the small victories in her own life that came only after periods of struggle and perseverance. Hope, she realized, wasn't about blind optimism or denying reality. It was about choosing to believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow despite the uncertainties of today. Hope isn't passive. It's an active force that requires nurturing. Eliza began to explore ways to cultivate hope in her daily life. One practice she embraced was focusing on small, tangible goals. Instead of being overwhelmed by the enormity of her challenges, she broke them down into manageable steps. Each step forward, no matter how small, became a reminder that progress was possible. She also learned the importance of surrounding herself with people who uplifted her. Hope is contagious, and being in the company of those who radiate positivity can reignite one's own belief in brighter days ahead. Eliza sought out friends and mentors who inspired her, who reminded her of her strengths and potential. Another practice she adopted was visualizing the future she wanted to create. She allowed herself to dream again, to imagine a life filled with joy, purpose, and fulfillment. Visualization wasn't just about daydreaming. It became a tool to reconnect with her aspirations and align her actions with her goals. Hope, she discovered, was not just about waiting for the dawn, but actively working toward it. Through this journey, Eliza also confronted the fears and doubts that had held her back. Hope, after all, is not the absence of fear, but the courage to move forward despite it. She learned to acknowledge her fears without letting them dictate her actions. By facing them head-on, she reclaimed her power and strengthened her resolve. Hope also taught her to find beauty and meaning in the present moment. She began to notice the small joys that had always been there, but often went unnoticed. The warmth of the sun on her skin, the laughter of a child, the comfort of a kind word. These moments became anchors, reminding her that even in the midst of struggle, there was still goodness to be found. Eliza's journey wasn't linear. There were days when hope felt distant, when the weight of her challenges threatened to pull her under. But each time, she returned to the practices that had helped her before. Slowly but surely, hope became a constant presence in her life, a quiet, unshakable strength that carried her forward. As she reflected on her journey, Eliza realized that hope had always been there, even in her darkest moments. It wasn't something she had to search for. It was something she had to choose. By embracing hope, she found not just a way to survive, but a way to truly live. Chapter 23. The Light Within. The soft hum of the world outside Eliza's window seemed quieter tonight, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting. She had spent so many nights like this, alone with her thoughts, wrestling with the weight of her experiences. But tonight felt different. There was a stillness that wasn't empty. It was full, alive, and brimming with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Eliza had come a long way since the days when her life felt directionless and devoid of purpose. Every lesson she had learned, every small victory she had claimed, had been a step toward rediscovering herself. Yet, she knew there was one final piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet addressed: the light within her. It was a phrase she had heard countless times in motivational talks and self-help books, but she had never truly understood its meaning. What was this inner light, and how could she find it? The world had taught her to look outward for validation and success. Achievements, relationships, material possessions. All these external markers had seemed like the keys to happiness. But the more she pursued them, the more she realized their limitations. They brought moments of joy, yes, but they were fleeting, like sunlight slipping through the cracks of a wall. The true, lasting light, she began to suspect, had to come from within. Her thoughts turned to her grandmother, whose wisdom had often guided her during difficult times. One memory in particular stood out. She was a child then, sitting by her grandmother's side as the older woman worked on a quilt. Each square of fabric told a story. Scraps of old dresses, remnants of curtains, even a piece of her grandfather's work shirt. This quilt, her grandmother had said, is like your soul. It's made up of pieces of everything you've been through. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge. And when it's finished, it's something beautiful, something uniquely yours. But the stitching, Eliza, that's the light. It's what holds it all together. At the time, Eliza hadn't fully grasped the significance of those words. But now, years later, they resonated deeply. The light within wasn't about perfection or the absence of pain. It was about the ability to weave together all the fragments of one's life into something meaningful, to find beauty in the broken pieces. Determined to explore this concept further, Eliza began a new practice: daily introspection. Each night, she would light a candle, its flame a symbol of the inner light she sought to nurture. She would sit in silence, letting her thoughts rise and fall like waves. It wasn't easy at first. Her mind, so used to racing from one worry to the next, resisted the stillness. But over time, she learned to quiet the noise and listen to the whispers of her soul. One evening, as she sat with her thoughts, a realization struck her. The light within wasn't something she had to create, it was something she had to uncover. It was already there, buried beneath layers of fear, doubt, and self-criticism. Her task wasn't to invent it, but to peel back those layers and let it shine. This shift in perspective brought a sense of freedom Eliza hadn't felt in years. She no longer saw her past mistakes and failures as burdens to carry, but as lessons that had shaped her into the person she was becoming. Each scar, each tear, was a testament to her resilience and a reminder of the light that had guided her through even the darkest times. To nurture this newfound connection to her inner light, Eliza embraced practices that brought her joy and peace. She began painting again, not for anyone else, but for herself. The act of blending colors on a canvas, of creating something out of nothing, reminded her of the beauty in transformation. She also spent more time in nature, finding solace in the rhythm of the seasons and the quiet wisdom of the earth. But perhaps the most transformative practice was self-compassion. For years, Eliza had been her own harshest critic, holding herself to impossible standards and punishing herself for falling short. Now, she learned to speak to herself with kindness, to offer herself the same understanding she so readily gave to others. Each time she stumbled, she reminded herself that the light within her was not diminished by her imperfections. It was illuminated by them. As weeks turned into months, Eliza noticed a profound change in her outlook. The world around her didn't seem so heavy anymore. Challenges still arose, as they always would, but she faced them with a newfound strength and grace. Her relationships deepened, too, as she became more open and authentic with the people in her life. By embracing her own light, she had made space for others to do the same. One day, while walking through the park, Eliza paused to watch the sunset. The sky was ablaze with color: golden yellows, fiery oranges, soft purples, all blending together in a symphony of light. It struck her then that the sunset wasn't beautiful because it was perfect. It was beautiful because it was fleeting, because it existed in that moment and would never be exactly the same again. That's what the light within her was, she realized. It wasn't a constant, unchanging force, but a dynamic, evolving energy that reflected the richness of her experiences. And just like the sunset, it was most beautiful when she allowed it to simply be. As Eliza continued her journey, she carried this understanding with her. The light within wasn't something she needed to find or earn. It was something she needed to honor. By doing so, she discovered a wellspring of joy and strength that carried her through life's ups and downs. And in embracing her own light, she became a source of light for others, illuminating the path for those still searching. Chapter 24: Embracing the Unknown. The unknown has always been humanity's greatest paradox, a source of both fear and wonder. It is the vast, uncharted territory where possibilities exist, but so do uncertainties. Eliza had often avoided the unknown, clinging to the familiar even when it no longer served her. But she had come to realize that growth, transformation, and even happiness required stepping into that nebulous space beyond comfort. Her journey to embrace the unknown began on an ordinary day when she found herself standing at a crossroads. Literally. She was on her usual morning walk when she noticed a small, overgrown path veering off the main trail. She had walked this route countless times, but had never paid attention to the unmarked path before. Something about it intrigued her, and before she could overthink, her feet began to move, leading her into the unknown. The path was uneven and winding, surrounded by trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the rustling of their leaves. As she ventured further, A sense of unease crept in. What if she got lost? What if this path led nowhere? But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the excitement of discovery. Each step felt like an act of courage, a small rebellion against the part of her that clung to certainty. When the path opened into a clearing, Eliza was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. A hidden grove, untouched and serene, with sunlight streaming through the canopy above. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching toward the heavens. Eliza sat beneath the tree, feeling a profound sense of peace. She realized that the beauty of the unknown wasn't just in what it revealed, but in the act of stepping into it, of trusting the journey even without a clear destination. That experience became a metaphor for her life. Eliza began to see every decision, every new opportunity, as a path into the unknown. Instead of fearing it, she chose to approach it with curiosity and wonder. She understood now that the unknown wasn't a void to be filled, but a canvas to be painted on. To strengthen her relationship with the unknown, Eliza adopted practices that encouraged exploration and risk-taking. One such practice was saying yes to opportunities that scared her. Whether it was volunteering to lead a project at work, signing up for a dance class, or striking up a conversation with a stranger, each act of courage became a step toward embracing uncertainty. She also learned the importance of letting go of control. For someone who had always meticulously planned every detail of her life, this was no small feat, but she realized that clinging to control was a way of resisting the unknown, of trying to predict and shape outcomes that were beyond her reach. By releasing her grip, she found freedom and flexibility. Life became less about following a rigid script and more about adapting to the unfolding story. Eliza's transformation wasn't without challenges. There were moments when the unknown felt overwhelming, when the uncertainty of her path made her question her choices. But each time, she reminded herself of the grove, of the oak tree standing steadfast amidst the unknown. She carried that image with her, a symbol of resilience and trust. One of the most profound lessons she learned was the difference between fear and intuition. Fear screamed at her to stay safe, to avoid risk, to retreat into the familiar. Intuition, on the other hand, whispered gently, guiding her toward what felt right, even if it was unfamiliar. By learning to distinguish between the two, Eliza was able to navigate the unknown with greater confidence. Her newfound relationship with the unknown began to ripple outward, transforming her interactions with others. She encouraged her friends to take risks, to pursue their dreams, to embrace change. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon she found herself surrounded by people who shared her adventurous spirit. One of her most rewarding experiences came when she mentored a young colleague who was hesitant to take on a challenging project. Eliza shared her own journey, emphasizing the growth and opportunities that came from stepping into the unknown. Inspired, her colleague took the leap and later credited Eliza for giving her the courage to do so. It was a reminder that by embracing the unknown, Eliza had not only transformed her own life, but had become a beacon for others. As Eliza sat down one evening to reflect on her journey, she realized how far she had come. The woman who once clung to certainty, who feared change and avoided risk, had become someone who welcomed the unknown with open arms. She no longer needed to know what lay ahead because she trusted herself to navigate whatever came her way. The unknown, she realized, wasn't something to be feared or conquered. It was a partner in her journey, a collaborator in the creation of her life. By embracing it, she had discovered not only the beauty of the world around her, but also the strength and resilience within her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and purple, Eliza whispered a quiet affirmation. I embrace the unknown with courage and curiosity, knowing it is the gateway to infinite possibilities. And with that, she closed her eyes, ready to dream of the paths yet to be discovered. Chapter 25. The Legacy of Happiness. The quiet hum of the city at dusk was a familiar backdrop for Eliza as she sat on her balcony, a journal resting on her lap. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting streaks of gold and pink across the sky. She hadn't planned to write tonight, but something compelled her. As she flipped open the journal, she realized how much had changed since the first page. Each entry told a story, not just of struggles and triumphs, but of lessons learned, wisdom gained, and the gradual construction of a life built on joy. Happiness, she now understood, wasn't a destination or a fleeting emotion. It was a legacy, a series of choices, practices, and beliefs that shaped not only her life but also the lives she touched. This realization came to her gradually, like the dawning of light after a long night. Her happiness wasn't hers alone. It radiated outward, influencing her relationships, her work, and even strangers who crossed her path. The idea of a happiness legacy had first been sparked during a conversation with a close friend. They had been reminiscing about childhood, sharing memories of the people who had shaped them. For Eliza, it was her grandmother, whose unwavering kindness and quiet resilience had been a guiding light. Even years after her passing, her grandmother's influence was alive in Eliza's actions and decisions. "That's her legacy," Eliza's friend had said. "Her happiness became yours." Those words stuck with her. If happiness could be a legacy, then what kind of legacy was she building? This question became the foundation for a new chapter in her life, one focused not only on cultivating her own joy, but also on spreading it to others. Her first step was simple yet profound: practicing presence. She made a conscious effort to be fully engaged in her interactions, to listen without distraction, and to respond with intention. She found that even small acts, smiling at a cashier, holding the door for a stranger, or offering a kind word to a colleague, had a ripple effect. These moments, though seemingly insignificant, were seeds of happiness sown in the lives of others. Eliza also began mentoring young professionals at her workplace. She shared her journey with them, emphasizing the importance of resilience, self-compassion, and gratitude. Her openness created a safe space for them to explore their own challenges and aspirations. Watching them grow and thrive brought her a sense of fulfillment that was deeper and more enduring than any personal achievement. One of the most transformative aspects of her happiness legacy was her commitment to giving back. Eliza volunteered at a community center where she taught creative writing to underprivileged teens. These sessions became a source of inspiration not just for the students but also for her. Their stories, filled with hope and determination despite their circumstances, reminded her of the strength of the human spirit. She often left the sessions feeling as though she had gained more than she had given. Her personal relationships also flourished as she embraced the idea of legacy. She became more intentional in nurturing her connections, investing time and energy in the people who mattered most. She wrote letters to friends and family, expressing her gratitude and sharing the impact they had on her life. These letters often led to heartfelt conversations and strengthened bonds that had frayed over time. But building a happiness legacy wasn't without its challenges. There were days when old habits resurfaced, when doubt and fear whispered that her efforts were futile. On those days, she leaned on the practices that had carried her this far: journaling, mindfulness, and reaching out to her support system. She reminded herself that the path to lasting joy was not linear, but a continuous journey of learning and growth. One evening, as she reflected on her journey, Eliza realized that her legacy wasn't about grand gestures or monumental achievements. It was about consistency, the daily acts of kindness, the choices to see the good, and the courage to face life's challenges with an open heart. These small, intentional actions were what made her life meaningful and what would leave a lasting impact. Her journal entries began to take on a new tone. They were no longer just reflections on her own experiences, but also a record of the lessons she wanted to pass on. She wrote about the importance of finding beauty in the mundane, of cultivating gratitude even in difficult times, and of the power of human connection. These entries, she hoped, would someday serve as a guide for others, a way to extend her legacy beyond her lifetime. As she closed her journal that night, Eliza felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The weight of trying to achieve happiness had been replaced by the lightness of simply living it. She looked out at the city, its lights twinkling like 1,000 tiny beacons, and thought about the interconnectedness of it all. Her happiness wasn't just hers. It was part of a larger tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives and experiences. In the quiet of that moment, she made a promise to herself to continue building her happiness legacy, not just for her own sake, but for the world she was a part of. Because in the end, happiness wasn't just a feeling. It was a gift, one that grew stronger and brighter the more it was shared.